Well, when we were posted to squadron, what happened was that lots of crews who just finished their advanced operational training arrived in the squadron, and on one day they were all put in a big room. There were pilots and air gunners and navigators and so on, and they were told to form a crew. So you looked around and found someone, a pilot, who would be the captain, and then various other people would come along and say, "I'd like to be in your crew." That's how it was done. I was the only Australian in my crew. The rest were all Englishmen. We were flying Wellingtons, and it had a crew of 6, 2 pilots, a rear gunner and a front gunner, and a navigator and a wireless operator. And our flights over to Europe and back were usually about 8 hours, and we'd usually take off about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening and get there in dark, of course. But they were very good aircraft. They are very tough aircraft, easy to fly, but they had one bad reputation, and that is they usually, once they caught fire, they usually just went up, and that was that. I was shot down on my 4th mission. Our target was Hamburg, the Bloemen Voss Aircraft Works at Hamburg. We'd bombed our target and were on the way home when some flak hit our aircraft, and it severed the hydraulic line to the rear gun, so that our rear gunner had no control of his gun after that, unfortunately. Might have been a different story. But as well as immobilising his gun, it started a fire in the rear turret, and as soon as that happened, a searchlight picked us up from the ground. Shortly after that, just a matter of minutes after that, a night fighter appeared and put a burst into our aircraft, which set off one of our flares inside the aircraft. So things weren't very good. But as well as setting off one of the flares, the machine gun burst which hit our aircraft also hit me. I took 7 bullets in my body, and also our navigator, Bill Legg, he took 2 bullets straight through his stomach and out the other side. So the captain gave the order to abandon aircraft, and the front gunner and the wireless operator and the captain did so, but I was lying on the floor of the aircraft unconscious, and so was the navigator, Bill Legg, beside me. And in the rear gun turret, Dave Fraser, who was our rear gunner, found that he could not turn his turret around and jettison it out of the way that he normally would, and so he had to crawl back into the body of the aircraft. He knew there was an escape hatch there. When he did so, he saw me lying there, and I'd managed to crawl a bit along towards the escape hatch, so he clipped my parachute on and put my hand on the ripcord, and he kicked me out, and he said, "For God's sake, pull it." So fortunately I came to consciousness enough to get that message, and I pulled the ripcord, and then I lost consciousness again and floated down till all of a sudden with a bang I hit the ground. when I come to think of it, if the rear gunner had not been forced to come into the body of the aircraft, which he normally wouldn't do when abandoning it, he wouldn't have seen me there, so that would have been that. "50 years, half a century after that happened, I met the German who shot me down. He told me a few things which answered a few questions in my mind that I'd had there for 50 years, and similarly for him, we corresponded and we used to send cards to one another. He said he didn't mind corresponding with members of the crew, providing they didn't bear him a grudge. And I said, well, look, it's either you or us. If our turret had been working, we might have killed you. So anyhow, the interesting thing that he told me, or one of them, but the most interesting, I think, was that it was his first attack on an aircraft. He was a new chum. He went on to shoot down 42 aircraft. He became an ace, very highly decorated. But this was his first. And he told me that he was so excited he forgot to arm his cannon, and the only thing that was armed was his machine gun. And when he fired, he only fired machine gun bullets. If he'd fired those cannon, it would have blown us out of the sky. So I was very lucky from so many different points of view. I was shot down on my fourth trip. Now, I didn't have time to get scared about it or anything. There was only 4 trips. I could understand that pilots who went on for 20, 30 trips could become very traumatised. That didn't happen to me because I never had a chance to be. When you were over the target and there was flak going everywhere and you could smell the cordite and so on, you became aware of the fact that there was danger there. But that was about all. I never ever thought of being shot down or of being a prisoner. Well, the Germans whisked me into an ambulance and drove me to the nearest prisoner of war hospital. It turned out to be a hospital solely for French prisoners of war. No one spoke English. I was lucky because I'd learnt French at modern school, so at least I wasn't behind the 8 ball. But anyhow, they took me there, and almost immediately I was lying on the operating table while the chief surgeon there operated on me. I was 6 months in this French hospital, but that again is where I was so lucky, because the chief surgeon in this hospital was a Frenchman. He was Professor René Simon, who was, before the war, Professor of Surgery at Strasbourg University, and a man of renown in Europe. He was a very skillful surgeon, and so I was very lucky that I happened to be taken to the place where René Simon was being held a prisoner. So some of the other doctors there figured that it was his skill that saved my life. So I was lucky again. There are so many occasions on which I just had great luck that I find it hard to credit. I spent just about 4 years altogether. I was sent to a small stalag which was run by the army, Subsequently, I spent most of the time in much larger camps which were run by the Luftwaffe, and basically we preferred the Luftwaffe controlled camps to the army controlled camps. In this army camp, when I got there, which was in about November 1941, we were just starting to dig a tunnel, and we completed a tunnel there. It was completed in May 1942. It broke quite a few records. We found out later it was the longest tunnel in either World War I or World War II, from which a successful escape had been made. We broke out about on the night of the 10th of May 1943, 1942, and the interesting thing was that it was exactly 1 year to within about 2 or 3 hours from the time that I was shot down. But anyhow, we were out for a fair while. I escaped with 2 others, and we were out for about 10 days, jumping trains, pinching food, holding up during the day wherever we could, and then moving at night. And eventually we were caught and taken back to our stalag. And when we got back there, we found that the Gestapo was in charge of the camp. This escape had been so big, according to Germans, that they had posters in all the police stations in Germany, and our photographs and a description of everyone, because they had all that information themselves, and one by one they recaptured them. We were the 48th, 49th to be captured. 52 got out altogether, and 1 was shot. On one occasion, we jumped on a train, and it didn't stop until too late. We had to rely upon the train being on a slope which would slow it down enough for us to jump off. We didn't want to break a leg or anything. And on this occasion, it was almost daylight before we could jump off the train. So anyhow, we then looked around, and there weren't any really good hiding places, and we eventually had to settle for a big sort of hole in a big farm there. And then there were aircraft going everywhere. We didn't realise they were still looking for us. Anyhow, I had decided that if we were caught, we were going to pretend we were Frenchmen, because at that stage, after the 1,000-plane raid on Cologne, German civilians were lynching pilots or aircrew that parachuted down into the wreckage of the city. So we said we were going to be French. And this farmer turned up with a shotgun, and he said, "Okay, out you come." And I spoke French, and nobody else said anything. And I told him we were escaped French prisoners. And he said, "Okay, march off." And he marched us with his shotgun. And what I didn't know, and this was the luck again that we had, That night, the night before, some French soldiers had escaped from a stalag for French prisoners, and it was only about a kilometre or two from where we were caught. So, you know, obviously when I said we were escaped French prisoners, this fellow, this German, accepted that straight away. And we had said that we would maintain that we were French until we were in official German hands. So he took us to this French stalag, and as soon as they took charge of us, I tried to explain where we were from, and he said, "We already know where you're from." He said, "There's been posters all over Germany in the police stations giving your names and description." So he said, "I'll send you right back there now." So that's what he did, and that's when we found the Gestapo back home. We had been in an incident which became rather infamous. We were marching along the road on this long march, and I saw 6 typhoons fly past. They were looking everywhere for shooting things on the ground, etc. And I watched them as I went past, and I saw them turn around and come back again. And I said to Herbie, "They're going to hit us." And I jumped into a ditch by the side of the road. And by the time the typhoons got to us, I had about 5 other bodies on top of me. And then they fired their rockets. And the rockets made one hell of a noise and created murder and mayhem. There were body parts flying everywhere and terrible noise of the aircraft engines and the screams of people who were killed. They killed 60 of us from that column, and there were 100 others who were seriously injured. And but Herbie and I, with my usual luck, didn't get a scratch. But I said, "Look, I'm not coming here anymore. I'm getting out and going to the West Front." So Herbie joined me, and we walked. We escaped from the column into the forest and then walked westward, knowing that sooner or later we'd come to the Allied forces. On the way, we met German soldiers going in the opposite direction. They didn't seem to be at all interested in fighting or anything. And in fact, on one occasion, we had a big dray pulled by 2 draft horses, was full of Germans, and they were going as fast as they could in the opposite direction. And when they went past and saw who we were, I called out to them in German. They threw over a couple of loaves of bread for us because I said we were a bit hungry. So they kept going. Eventually we came to the what we considered was no man's land. The German exodus towards the east seemed to have dwindled, and there was no one in front, and we couldn't see the British troops. They were still further away. A column of tanks stopped, and the tank commander opened up his hatch to get some fresh air, I guess, and I asked him in German where the British front line was. He wasn't very happy, but he said they're about 50 kilometres there and they're coming fast. So down went his hatch and on went the tanks, and Herbie and I kept going westward, and after another day or so we came across a stream with a stone bridge over it, and we thought we'd better hole up under this bridge, because if we go much further, somebody's going to shoot us. There were a lot of tricky, happy people around the place. So we stayed there, and then eventually we heard tanks coming, and so we had to decide whether they were British tanks or German tanks. We had a good look at them in the distance and concluded that they were British tanks, so we came out from under the bridge where we'd been hiding, and we had a big white flag that we had prepared, and we waved this flag, and the tanks came up as a column of tanks, and the leader popped up his hatch and said, "Well, who are you?" So we established our identity. We told him what we'd observed of German movements that we'd passed through, and so he leant down and he threw out half a bottle of schnapps and a packet of cigarettes and a couple of big bars of chocolate, and he said, "Get on the right side of that," and off he went, followed by all the other little tanks. It was all like a mother duck going along with all the ducklings following. So we went to the nearest liberated, not for whom, house, where there was a farmer and his wife and 2 daughters, and we told them in no uncertain terms that were 3 things we wanted. 1 was a hot bath, 2 was a decent feed of bacon and eggs, and 3 was a nice sleep in a bed between white sheets. Those 3 things we hadn't seen for about 4 years. He gladly complied, and next morning after we'd had this nice sleep, we got up and went out. We had a plan, and we were looking for transport going to the front, again, and we saw this white truck come down, racing down, passing troops, etc. And we tried to wave it down. Unfortunately, it stopped, and we realised, again, our luck, we realised that it was brigade headquarters, and there was a young brigadier in there who had just come from a divisional conference, and he said, "Oh, hop up." When we told him what we wanted, he said, "Hop in and come with me." And we sped off and rapidly got to the front line, and we wanted to get to a village that had just been overrun by the troops. And the brigadier pointed out when he said, "We've just overrun this one, so you can get out here, boys." So we got out, and I asked the first German I saw where the mayor's house was. And he pointed it out to me, so Herbie and I went up and knocked on the door, and I said to the mayor, "Do you have a car?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Well, we're commandeering it for military purposes. Give me the key." So he gave me the key, and off we went. Our plan was to drive to Paris, sell the car, have a great time with the proceeds, then go to England. However, by the time we got to Brussels, we were not very well. We had dysentery, nausea. I think it was due to all the rich foods that we'd been eating for the last week or so as we were driving this Opel down towards Brussels. Anyhow, at that stage we had to hole up in an American hospital for about 4 days to recover, and we grew cold on the idea of going to Paris, and home was looking better every minute. So we said, "Well, look, we'll go and see if we can find the air transport officer and get back to England pretty quickly." Well, we did find him, as a young flight lieutenant, and but he said, "Look, sorry boys, it'll be weeks before you can get back. I've got a list this long of people who are to go back, and they're urgent." So I drew him over to one side, and we had a very serious talk. And then about half an hour later, Herbie and I mounted a Lancaster and took off straight away for England. And as we got in and waved to the young flight lieutenant, he dangled the keys and put them in his pocket with a big smile. So that's what happened to our painting the town red in Paris. Herbie and I were in hospital recovering, but on VE Day we hopped out of our hospital bed. We went down, this was in Brighton, and our hospital was on the main street of Brighton, and we went down there with all the nurses and we were dancing on the main street, and that was VE Day for us. Well, my objective was to stay in England as long as I could, because I was being supported by the Air Force, and also I went to London University to sit an exam in economics. So I stayed there for, I guess, about 6 months. I went to Oxford to a special course there, and I went to London to sit some exams, and I went up to Scotland. I spent a lot of time travelling around there until in the end I got a letter from the Air Force saying if you're not on the next boat, you can pay for it yourself. So I was on the next boat.